army of dragon fire. I know its wrath and ruin. I have faced the great serpents of the north. Stay here if you will and rot. 100 years is a mere blink in the life of an elf. I'm patient. I can wait.
Today, we're heading into, well, a really fascinating part of Tolkien's world. It's often in the shadows, you know. But it's packed with history. We're talking about the Woodland Realm of Mirkwood and its elven king, Thranduil. He's quite the enigmatic figure. Okay, let's unpack this. Our goal here is to really get to grips with where the Silvan Elves came from, what their forest home was like, and trace Thranduil's own journey, his leadership, through the huge events of the Third Age. We're sticking strictly to Tolkien's published stuff, his books, his letters. And honestly, there's some surprises in there. It might change how you see a king you maybe only know from that run-in with Bilbo. Yeah. So to really get the Woodland Realm, we need to start at the beginning. Who were the Silvan Elves? The Wood Elves. Yeah. Where did they actually come from?
Right, and their origins are key. What's fascinating here is how their choices really shaped a unique cultural identity that defines everything about their realm. The Silvan Elves, they're basically a branch of the Teleri Elves. Yeah. So the Teleri were heading for Valinor on the Great Journey, but a group of them just stopped. They chose not to finish the trip. These were the Nandor. They lingered by the river Anduin, felt drawn to the forests, you know. And eventually they settled in places like Greenwood the Great, which later becomes Mirkwood, obviously, and also LOTR.
Ah, okay. So they chose Middle-earth over the Undying Lands.
Exactly. And because of that choice, they didn't gain the same, let's say, wisdom or power as the Eldar who went to Aman. But they gained something else, this incredibly deep connection to nature, to music, and a real sense of secrecy, self-reliance. Their language eventually became a dialect of Sindarin, and they mingled a bit with Sindarin and Noldorin elves who came east later. It created this really unique blend.
A culture born from staying behind, essentially, connected to the wild.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the Sindar. That leads us right to Thranduil's father, Oropher. How did he, coming from a different elven group, the Sindar, end up ruling the Silvan Elves?
Yeah, Orpher's story is crucial. He was a Sindarin elf originally from Doriath.
The Doriath, the hidden kingdom.
Well, that's the one. A major realm in the First Age. After Beleriand was destroyed, Oropher led a small group of Sindar eastwards. They ended up in Greenwood the Great, among the much larger population of Silvan Elves. And here's the important part. Oropher and his followers didn't just rule over the Silvan Elves, they actually adopted their language, many of their customs.
Really? They assimilated?
To a large extent, yes. He consciously rejected the influence of the Noldor, who were also migrating east, choosing isolation and independence for his realm. You even see his strategic thinking later, moving his main settlement north as Dol Guldur's shadow started to grow in the south.
Makes sense. But his story doesn't end well, does it?
No, it doesn't. His commitment to independence kind of led to tragedy. He fought in the War of the Last Alliance against Sauron, but he led his forces, who were more lightly armed than others, into battle at Dagorlad prematurely. Tolkien says most of his army was destroyed. Oropher himself fell there.
Wow.
Thranduil, his son, actually survived that, a devastating loss, and he had to lead the survivors, the remnant, back home to Greenwood.
So Thranduil becomes king right after this huge defeat, having lost his father and so many of his people. That must have shaped him profoundly.
Absolutely. You can see it directly reflected in his reign.
How so? What characterized his rule after taking over?
Caution, discretion. It was almost an amplification of his father's policy of isolation, probably driven by that traumatic experience at Dagorlad. He made a real point of avoiding getting tangled up in the big conflicts of other elves or men whenever possible. He set up his main capital in the northeast of the forest, in these amazing caverns.
Underground?
Yes, inspired by the memory of Menegroth and Doriath, his ancestral home, you know, the Thousand Caves, a defensible hiding place. Tolkien describes it, there's a cave far and wide with many passages and halls. So these halls became the heart of Silvan culture, but with that layer of Sindarin refinement Oropher had brought.
But he wasn't weak, despite being wary.
Not at all. His realm was strong, well-organized. They had to be. They constantly defended their borders against orcs and those giant spiders that started infesting the woods. It was a strong, hidden kingdom.
Right, a strength built on keeping out of sight, which must have become even more vital later on. Because Greenwood didn't stay, Greenwood did it. That shadow Oropher moved away from eventually caught up.
It absolutely did. That's the great tragedy of the Third Age for that forest. Evil returned. The necromancer established himself in the south, in that fortress of Dol Guldur.
Who turned out to be Sauron hiding out.
Exactly. And as his power grew, this shadow spread north, poisoning the forest, making it dark and dangerous. That's when it got the name Mirkwood. Tolkien puts it chillingly. Dark power had taken shape and was growing fast. Its shadow was spreading.
How did Thranduil react to his home becoming Mirkwood?
His response was consistent with his character. He didn't flee. He withdrew his people further north again, consolidating their strength within the forest. But crucially, he held on to his realm, maintained its independence. It's interesting, he chose not to join the White Council, that group with Gandalf, Saruman, Galadriel.
Really? He stayed out of it.
He did. But he kept a very close watch on the necromancer from afar. He protected his realm through that established pattern. Secrecy, subtlety. Upholding the elvish tradition of hidden kingdoms surviving by being overlooked.
Okay, so that brings us to The Hobbit. Because for a lot of people, that's their main, maybe only picture of Thranduil. And let's be honest, he doesn't come across great. Imprisoning Thorin and the dwarves seems pretty harsh, cold, maybe even greedy.
He really does get a bad rap from that encounter, doesn't he? And it's mostly because we see him through Bilbo's eyes, a hobbit who's scared and out of his depth.
So is that perception wrong? Was he misunderstood?
Profoundly, I'd argue. When you look at Tolkien's other writings, his motivations become much clearer. He was being protective, not cruel. That perceived greed over treasure, it wasn't about personal wealth. Tolkien explicitly states he did not think of gold or treasure, but of the safety of his realm.
Okay, so the treasure was about funding his kingdom's defense.
Precisely. Think about it. He's got this growing shadow in the south, Dol Guldur. He needs resources. The dwarves arrive, talking about reclaiming a vast hoard. For Thranduil, that treasure represented security, the means to defend his people. It was strategic, not selfish.
That makes sense, especially given his history.
And look at his actions later, the Battle of the Five Armies. Yes, he initially wants a share of the gold, but when the real threat appears the goblins, he immediately joins forces with the men and the other dwarves. And after the battle, we see mercy, wisdom. Remember what Thorin says on his deathbed. It's directed at Bilbo, but it resonates with Thranduil's values too.
If more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world.
Exactly. Coming from Thorin, the dwarf obsessed with gold, that's a powerful realization. It almost feels like an acknowledgement of the Elven King's perspective in the end.
Wow. Yeah, that quote hits differently in this context. Okay, so that reframes the Hobbit encounter quite a bit. Now let's jump forward to the big one. The War of the Ring. Middle-earth is on the brink. What's happening up in Mirkwood while Gondor and Rohan are fighting for survival?
It's easy to forget, but Mirkwood was a major front in the War of the Ring too. It wasn't just happening in the south. His realm was directly attacked by forces from Dol Guldur. Tolkien records it. On March 15th, the battle under the trees began.
So simultaneous battles.
Yes. Thranduil repelled the forces of Dol Guldur and drove them out. It was a hard-fought victory under the shadow of the trees. This northern war was incredibly important. It tied up Sauron's forces, preventing them from reinforcing the main push in the south. Thranduil holding that flank was vital.
I never really thought about the strategic importance of that northern front.
It was huge, and after Sauron was finally defeated, there's this wonderful moment. Thranduil meets Celeborn of Lothlorien in the middle of Mirkwood.
Celeborn, Galadriel's husband.
That's him. And together, these two elven lords symbolically cleansed the forest of its remaining evil. They renamed it Eren Lascallan, the Wood of Green Leaves.
Eren Lascallan. That's beautiful. A sign of renewal.
Absolutely. A symbol of healing for the land. And also, a rare moment of unity and cooperation between these sometimes quite separate elven realms.
So, the forest is healed. Sauron is gone. What about Thranduil himself? What's his final chapter? His legacy. Why should you, listening now, really care about this elven king who stayed in the shadows so much?
Well, his ultimate fate, it's not spelled out. We assume he stayed in Eren Lascallan for a while, ruling his now-healed kingdom. Did he eventually sail west to Valinor? Tolkien doesn't tell us. It's left open. But his legacy, it's significant, primarily through his son, Legolas.
Right, Legolas of the Fellowship.
Exactly. Legolas carried Thranduil's lineage, the spirit of the Woodland Realm, right into the heart of the fight against Sauron. And there is that incredible detail at the very end, when Legolas eventually does build a ship and sails west.
He takes Gimli with him.
He takes Gimli the dwarf with him. And with him, it is said, went Gimli the dwarf. It's unprecedented. A dwarf allowed into the Undying Lands. It speaks volumes about their friendship, of course, but maybe also reflects a kind of opening up, a shift in perspective among the elves. Perhaps influenced by the long, hard experiences of kings like Thranduil.
That's an amazing thought.
Thranduil himself, he occupies this unique space. He's a bridge, really. He carries the memory and nobility of ancient Doriath, his Sindarin heritage, but he ruled over and deeply identified with the simpler, nature-focused Silvan Elves. His great achievement wasn't conquest or overt displays of power, it was preservation. He successfully guided his people through the darkest centuries of the Third Age, using secrecy, wisdom, and quiet strength.
What a story. It really is a deep dive into resilience, isn't it? Thranduil's journey is about endurance, blending cultures, and this subtle, persistent strength that kept his people safe. A Sindar prince who became king of the Wood Elves, held his ground against Dol Guldur, fought in the Key Wars. He did so much more than just capture some dwarves.
Absolutely. Tolkien gives us glimpses, not a full biography, but the pieces form a compelling picture. He wasn't aloof or greedy. He was careful, yes. Capable, certainly. And I think ultimately compassionate. Honestly, you could argue he was one of the most successful elven rulers in Middle-earth. Not measured by glory, maybe, but by survival, by resilience, humility, wisdom in the face of immense centuries-long pressure. His story, and the story of the Silvan Elves, it's a powerful reminder, isn't it? That just preserving beauty, music, life, holding on to those things when shadows lengthen, that's a profound kind of heroism in itself. It makes you think, what aspects of that quiet heroism, that endurance, resonate most deeply with you today?
A great question to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Thranduil's Woodland Realm.